Welcome back, NextGen Nation. I hope you enjoyed our lunch keynotes and NextGen award winners. Some really inspiring discussion today. And welcome to this session, Pick Your Battles, How to Know What Matters. My name is Doug Mashguri. I'm Vice President and General Manager of GovLoop. And today I have the added privilege of being the moderator for what's going to be a great session. So let's talk a little bit about today's session before we get going. In any given day, you run into hiccups, obstacles, annoyances, and challenges. And that's just part of life. When you're in the workplace, however, it's important to kind of sift through these disruptions and be judicious about what you want to battle, what's a bummer versus what's a problem. And the good news is, if you're struggling with this, we got the guy to talk about it today. I'm going to play a little suspense here. Before we get to that, though, I got to do some housekeeping items for you. So let's go to housekeeping items. Tweet with us. If you're using Twitter or X or whatever you're calling it these days, we'd love to know what you learned. Please use the hashtag NextGenGov to share your takeaways. We have great additional resources available to you available for download from your console. That also includes today's slide deck. Also, if you have any technical difficulties, and I hope you do not, but if you do, just put it into the Q&A console and my associate Kelly will help you figure out your technical issue. We also, in that same Q&A portal, is a place where you could put questions for our speaker, and we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. We also have an open attendee chat today. That's a place for you to interact with other attendees, speakers, share thoughts, comments, whatever you'd like. It's open for everybody. And if you miss anything, don't worry. We're going to email you a link tomorrow to all the content with links to all the sessions, so you can pick up wherever you left off. We're also offering CPEs for today's session if you're interested. 3 simple steps to get an CPE. 1, attend this live. Well, you're here, so you're doing that. Step number 2, there'll be 3 polls interspersed throughout today's presentation. You'll need to take the poll and submit your answer. And lastly, you need to complete a CPE evaluation that can be found in the resource module and in the main environment in the resource center. If you're able to do those 3 things, you'll be able to get a CPE credit for today's session. So let's go ahead and talk about what we're doing today. Today's speaker is Don Bauer. Don is the Chief Technology Officer, Global Talent Manager at U.S. Department of State. We were just having a great conversation. He's also a hobbyist and enthusiast and a woodworker and a 3D printer and a whole bunch of other stuff. We may run out of time, but if you have questions, hit up Don on that as well. Hey, Don, welcome to NextGen. Pleasure to have you today.
Thank you. Let's get started. All right, so pick your battles. You know, it's an interesting thing. When Emily and I chatted about this particular session, it really resonated with me on multiple levels. And I'm sure those of you that practice what we call in the industry radical candor, which sometimes you speak the truth when you shouldn't or when you probably should look the other way. I have on many occasions in my professional career been parked in a corner for saying things or fighting battles that I probably shouldn't have fought. So yeah, this is coming from a place of where I think I've learned my lessons and I kind of earned the idea of how this actually is talked about. So first and foremost, I think all of us, when we're in a professional context, we really, the one saving grace for me professionally, and this happens to all of us. Inevitably, we're going to encounter people that we just don't mesh with, that may not like us, who may not get what we're trying to discuss. So you're always in the situation where, okay, I have a issue or concern to address. And in some cases, there is conflict that could arise, especially if there's decisions to be made or something going on. So, I found it very useful to always kind of stay focused on the mission, right? What's important? What are we trying to achieve? And it's a great opportunity to maybe give yourself permission to not react, to not go down that rabbit hole, because people, as we know, individual will push your buttons. they will be passive aggressive. They'll say things, and your first reaction is, "Oh, how dare you talk to me? I'm a professional. I'm competent," or whatever. And then stay focused on, is this something that really is important to the mission, or is this just something that you're reacting to? So, the idea is always identifying truly what matters in achieving your goals. And then, of course, it works because if you choose the things that contribute to your mission, that's where your energy is best used, right? Because I can tell you, you can spend a lot of energy if you get into a conflict with anybody. So, I think that's ultimately, it's almost like a base capability, or I would say, even from a executive perspective, it's almost a foundational element to executive leadership, is you really need to stay focused on the mission. And I'll share an example. When I was in driver's ed, and I took driver's ed like 50 years ago, 45 years ago. And the one thing I remembered, of all the things, because, you're driving and they tell you not to do this and not to do that, and, all the turn signals and all that. But the one thing that I always remembered was the driver said, if you're going down the highway and there's a car coming at you with its headlights on, especially if its brights are on, there's a situation here where you can't see where you're going. And they always said, like, focus on that right line on the road. Just use your eyes, focus on the right side of the road to keep the car in the lane. And it's a great analogy to this, is that if you got somebody coming at you, and I mean, obviously sometimes people can be very aggressive depending on the environment you're in. The mission's over here. Just stay focused on the mission, and use that as your guiding principle to move forward, with the understanding that your end goal is to accomplish the mission. And the mission can be varied, but the idea is that that's the approach. So, and I did some research. I did quite a bit of research for this, actually. And of course, I found this quote from Winston Churchill that says, "You'll never reach your destination if you stop and throw stones at every dog that barks." And this is so true. You think about it. If you let all the, I call them like the yip dogs, the ankle biters, get at you, you're never going to get where you're going. So you really, there's the things where you just, and there is a technique or a strategy where you don't react, but it doesn't mean that you're ambivalent or you don't care, because some people will think, oh, well, he's just being aloof and whatever. It's like, no, you can let them know. It's like, look, I really care about getting this done. And this doesn't help me get there, and I think you understand, and there are tactics that you can use. I don't think we'll get into them here, about the soft skills that you need to develop as a leader to understand the types of comments and discussions you can have, or phrases you can use in order to deflect those individuals who are really truly saying, yeah, look at him, he's walking away, he doesn't care. And quite the contrary, you do care, and that's why you're walking away. So it's one of those cases where you really have to understand the situation, and I can tell you, even myself, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I'm guilty of reacting as well. There are occasions where you have to take a couple of breaths. So anyway, next. Strategic patience. This is a really key term, one that I struggle with regularly. It's always taken a moment to pause and reflect and evaluate the situations before reacting. And there's a couple of situations or a couple of reasons behind this. The first one is somebody says something and you're like, oh, I need to respond. I got to either rebut what they're saying, or I need to add context, because sometimes things are taken out of context, which then skews everybody's perspective or perception of what you're doing. And as we know, perception's reality, especially when you're dealing with like customers and even clients in some cases. But I find myself now where I'll be listening, I'll see something to react, and I will just write one or two words down that remind me of that thought. And then I stay engaged. And I think it's very important that you have to listen, because in some cases, we're all guilty. As soon as somebody says something that reacts, we kind of flip the listening switch off, and all we're doing is waiting for the noise to stop so we can respond. And in some cases, you tend to lose the actual content or intent or meaning behind what that person is trying to say. And I can tell you that is a very, very rapid way to alienate those that you're trying to work with. Again, remember mission. You'll alienate those because they will immediately pick up on the fact that you don't care what they're saying. You only want to be heard because you want to say what you want to say. So that's a very important strategy. And of course, Stephen Covey said it best: seek first to understand, then to be understood, which means wait, listen, understand the full account of information you're being presented, which then will give you an opportunity to then respond. And I use the word responded versus react, because reaction's emotional. Respond where you can actually make a certain comment or statement that, again, you focus back on the mission and not necessarily the idea of somebody saying something that they may have said it wrong or said it incorrectly. You focus back on, well, here's the way it is, and this is the goal that we need to reach from a mission standpoint. So, all right. So, political capital. This is a big one. You know, it's one of those weird terms that gets thrown around a lot, but I think we all understand what it is. Sometimes it might be more, little less, I don't know what you'd say, tangible from a standpoint. It's very hard to gauge your political capital in an organization. But you always, well, I guess the biggest thing to say about political capital is you know when you don't have it. And sometimes that's when you cross that line. So I think it's really important that you, again, if you operate in the mission mindset, I don't, you know, and I know I sound like a broken record, but I can tell you professionally that has saved my behind more times than I care to admit, because at some point you always have to bring the conversation back to, hey, you might not like me. You may not like what I said. You may not like the email I sent asking a question about this. But in the end, I'm trying to make this happen. And the other side of that is really offering up a very collaborative approach to how you want to accomplish goals. And case in point, you know, it's very easy to, and I'm working HRIT, so I work with the HR practitioners. I have a huge team of technologists. We manage all the servers. We do all the stuff a CIO does, but it's all for HR. And we all know HR doesn't speak tech, so there's always some challenges in just actually communicating between each other. But I think ultimately, when I look at this, I'm like, all right, if something's broken, when I go to my colleagues, the first thing I say is, hey, this is not working. What can I do in order to help us solve this problem? Okay. When you present an issue to your colleagues, now, there are many occasions where I know full well whose fault it is. Okay, let's be honest. You know, if it's an access to the Active Directory and they own it, hey, that is not on me. But my first offering is always, what can I do in order to help us solve this problem? Well, that's a very disarming approach to getting something done, because immediately you're telling them, you're not throwing something over the fence at them. You're actually saying, let's work together to solve this problem. And if it's on me, hey, I'll be the first one to step up and do whatever you ask me to do. And a lot of times it could be, hey, Don, yeah, we got you, but hey, you didn't submit a 5765 part B, C, and D filled out and signed by 17 people in order for this to be turned on. But I'll tell you what, I'll turn it on for you if you promise to get me that piece of paper with all those signatures. And in that case, I will scramble and make it my number one goal is to give them what they need in order to solve that problem. But if you understand how I approach that issue, that's a great way of kind of disarming any reaction that somebody has if you come, quote unquote, at them with a problem. But I'm similarly the same. I also offer that same type of approach when they come to me, because obviously I hear a lot of complaints about how the system doesn't work or whatever happens. And 9 times out of 10, it's data or whatever. And I'm like, all right, well, let's work together to solve this problem. Can you give me a little bit more information? And then I'll see what I can do. But the idea is that in every interaction, people feel heard and included. And that's an interesting term these days, right? We're all big about inclusive and accessibility and all that other stuff. But that's actually a great way to operate. Inclusion really solves a lot of problems. Just like I mentioned earlier, if you interrupt somebody while they're talking or you fail to listen to them, you're not including them. If you have this hybrid meeting with 20 people on it and every person has a stake in what you're talking about, and you don't pause to let those individuals contribute to the conversation, and you're in the room, shame on you, because you're excluding them. You're not including them, you know? And this is just about the idea of good practices in order to make your team feel appreciated, make them feel like they're contributing, make them feel like they're part of the mission too. So these are all strategies. While we may be talking about fighting battles or political capital, it really speaks about just being able to get along in the workplace. And I also wanted to share, there's a couple of phrases that I learned early on. I had an executive, we all have mentors. My mentor was parked a few times. That's why I picked him, because we were both parked at various times in our career. I even left government for a while and came back. But I asked him about that. I'm like, how do you deal with these situations when you know somebody's like blatantly just talking out their behind and they're making things worse? He said, there's two phrases that you could always use, and you should write these down. One is, what am I missing? Okay. So you say it and say, it's like, what am I missing? Because I thought this, this, and this, but you're saying that. What am I missing here? Please help inform me. That's a very some people might call it passive aggressive, but it's not, as long as you're not snarky about it. But the whole premise behind that is, obviously I don't have a complete picture here, and I need the complete picture in order to understand your perspective, right? And part of that idea of collaborating and working with others is you need to basically be on the same wavelength with your perspectives, okay? So it's, what am I missing? And the other one is, help me understand, okay? So those are two very, very useful phrases. Now, I can tell you my team is of the point when those two phrases come out, they already know where I'm at in my head, because I'm at this situation like, all right, help me understand how this is working here, because they already know that's, but I'm trying to be, I'm leaving the door open for somebody to provide me additional information so that we make a more complete decision, right? I mean, the obvious thing is, if you're ever in a leadership and management role, number one first rule of leadership and management is clear direction, right? And if you tell somebody to go do something and you don't give them very specific instructions or enough detail to do it the way you expect it to be done, shame on you. It's not their fault if they didn't do it to your expectations, if you did not let your expectations be known. So there's this opportunity here to open the door and say, well, help me understand, or what am I missing, so that you can come together in support of the mission. So it all comes back. It's kind of a round circle. So here's a perfect example. This is a little bit more of a definition that you might be able to use: trust and credibility. And I can't understate the real need for integrity in leadership. Because there's nothing more frustrating. We've all had bosses, myself included, that will tell you one thing and do another. And man, I tell you, that's really hard to take, especially if it's your boss, because you're not in a situation normally where you can actually call them out or do anything about it. So those are frustrating and sometimes can be very stressful, especially if you're trying to get a job done and your boss is telling you one thing, doing something else, or lying to you. So I can only say that when you're in that role of leadership, don't be that kind of leader, right? And usually my staff, I work in an environment where we have clearances, and I always tell everybody, and I always sit with all the new employees, contractors or feds, and I say, okay, here's my speech. I provide vision. I expect you to, help the mission get accomplished. I said, I will never lie to you. I said, if you ask me a question, you'll get one of two answers. I'll either tell you the truth, or I will say, I can't talk about it. And I feel like you need to respect the fact that there are certain situations that I can't talk about. If it's fiduciary, if it's a personnel matter, if it's sensitivity around health or other issues, there are situations where you ask me a question, I'm gonna say, hey, I can't talk about it. But that's not lying to you, that's being honest with you. And I feel like you set that foundation of trust within your organization, both in and across. That'll gain you so much political capital, because people know that you're a straight shooter. They're always gonna deal with somebody who always is going to be honest with them. And honesty also means that when you screw up, you own it, right? And I feel like, and that's not the boss that falls on his sword every time something goes south, because I know those people. They're like, oh, it's my fault. I'm like, no, it's not. We know it's not your fault. Don't even try and claim it, okay? It was somebody else's fault, and they've already claimed responsibility, so you don't have to claim it too. So influence and persuasion, that's a little more of I would say, a soft skill. Some people are better at it than others. There are great courses out there that talk about persuasion. I would definitely encourage, if you feel like that's a weakness, that's an area that you can work on those soft skills. There are lots of training courses around negotiations and things like that. All of those revolve around influence and persuasion. But I can tell you, if you run against somebody who is your mortal enemy. And we all have those, right? And I mean that in air quotes. It's not like they're going to come to your house and beat you up or anything, but they might be your mortal enemy in the workplace. It's very hard for them to be mean and, whatever to you if you're like, how do we solve this problem for all of our customers that already 500 people have complained about, right? Again, we're back to mission. You completely disarm anybody who's got it out for you if you're focusing on actually solving the problem and not reacting or being emotional with your relationship with that particular individual. And most people will give you so much credit for being the bigger person and focusing on the mission and not devolving your response to their poking and pushing your buttons. So it's really something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. It's like, look, hey, I care about getting this done. And if you're truly honest about that and you have the integrity that you've already demonstrated in your activities and the way you behave, it's very hard for anybody to undermine that when you're trying to get something done. And that is kind of the secret sauce, right? If you present yourself with integrity and you're trustworthy and you're honest and you get things done and you own things when they don't go well and you treat your people well, well, then all of a sudden, when you run into a situation where this other person is an a-hole, and I've been there, they look like so much the fool because they know they already know you're focused on the mission. You're not going to sit here and play petty games with them, at least not in front of everybody else. I mean, I'm in HR. Things could happen to your assistant, and I don't know, your access got removed? I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. Anyway, and then the other side, of course, that you can't ever overstate is relationships. Okay. And it's funny. I've been at the State Department for about 8 years, and some of my colleagues might be on here. I don't know. I've kind of become the guy that everybody goes to, not because I am so super good at anything. I just know everybody. Because after 8 years, you get to know who the people are and who's in charge of things. And if you're as equally responsive to your colleagues when they come to you with problems, and believe me, everybody comes to HR at some point. I mean, that is a cool place to be because at some point they need their eval fixed or their promotion got messed up or there's a wrong date in their personnel file, which, I would do regardless of my relationship with them. But the idea that you're willing to help them in whatever they need versus the idea of, from that builds tremendous amount of goodwill. And it ultimately results in a very effective way to get things done. And I want to kind of caveat that a bit because it isn't just, there's this understanding that sometimes people like to shortcut process because they know somebody, and that's not healthy for the organization. And I'll give you a couple examples. For instance, I continuously get pinged by pretty much anybody, and that's, 70, 80,000 people. They will routinely email me, hey, I have a problem. I can't get into XYZ system. This is wrong or whatever. Now, I never turn them away because customer service is really everybody's job. And I feel like you will never hear not my job come out of my mouth because I may not be able to help you, but I know somebody who might, and I'm always going to get you to that right person. But the other side of that is if we don't, if from a standpoint of do we take care of it or do we, who I know in order to get that done, I want to make sure that I'm giving them a handoff, and I want the person to basically feel like, hey, this guy is going to take care of me regardless. And I even make it a point to follow up. If I hand somebody off, I will follow up with them and say, hey, did you get your problem resolved? Right? That little extra bit of just saying, hey, I care that something happened and that your issue got appropriately resolved. And over time, those loyalty, those relationships will return multiple, I should say, how would they say it? There's always an opportunity, but you always want to make sure that you follow the process because every time I hand off somebody to my help desk, I also create a ticket. Why? Because we track how much work our help desk does. If I go behind the scenes and take care of somebody's issue and we spend some time on it, because when I ask something to get done, it gets done, and my team expends energy doing it, and we don't track that, well, that's a disservice to the whole organization. Because maybe I need more resources, and the only way I can convince leadership I need resources is to show them the workload that we have. And if I'm an executive and I reach behind the curtain and make something happen and we don't track how much time or expense that took, well, that's unfair to the rest of the organization. So there are always this idea that you should always try and follow process, but when there's hangups, use those relationships for the way that you want to, to help move things along. But be mindful that processes exist for a reason, and sometimes those reasons don't necessarily benefit you, but they would disadvantage others. So, are we getting close to a poll there, Doug?
We are. You ready? I'll move to it now. Here we go. Perfect lead in. All right, here's our first poll. When faced with multiple challenges at work, which factor most influences your decision to engage or let it go? The potential impact on team or project outcomes, the urgency or immediacy of the problem, the level of risk involved in not addressing the issue, or last one, whether it aligns with my core responsibilities and goals. Once again, the question is, when faced with multiple challenges at work, which factor most influences your decision to engage or let it go? Don, quick question for you while we wait for some results to come in. Based on your experience, do you have a inkling on what choice might lead our responses here? Hopefully we don't have any bias here in terms of the result.
Decision to engage or let it go has to be A, the impact on the team or project outcomes. If I am going to stay true to my conscience shtick here, which is mission, A, I think obviously is mission. D is me, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's me. Well, I'm going to take care of myself first. And we all have those colleagues that, they always evaluate the optics of a situation and go, is this going to make me look good or not? Yeah. And sometimes they won't even engage if it doesn't make them look good, even though it won't make them look bad. And we just have to, we have to maneuver around those people. So
yeah, there's been a lot of good talk in the chat about just kind of supporting some of the points you've been making. It's really positive. All right, well, hey, let's check out the results here. Let's see what we see. The leader in the clubhouse is A, the potential impact on team or project outcomes, followed by the urgency or immediacy, followed by level of risk, and whether it aligns to my core responsibilities. So
yeah, and I will say that the second and third ones, those are not wrong answers, because depending on your lens, I can tell you, if you're in the cybersecurity community, B or C probably will trump A, because how immediate is a problem, or what's the risk involved in not addressing it, right? So there are legitimate, I think all those first three are legitimate answers depending on the situation. So no, that's very fair.
All right, well, I'm going to bring you back to your next slide here.
All right. So I would be remiss if I told you, I'm not the be all end all knowledge on this. I did quite a bit of research for this presentation, and I happened to just say, I did a Google on Choose Your Battles, and this great little diagram came up from Sheila O.J. I hope I say that correctly. She's on LinkedIn. It was a LinkedIn article. I was like, holy moly, look at this, and she actually leads a practice in Nigeria. She's actually in Nigeria, and the Nigerian version of LinkedIn, which is like ng.linkedin, whatever. I didn't know this, but I found this article, and the link is in here. So hopefully when you get the slides, please go read her article, because I think multiple perspectives on this same topic are valuable. I don't think everything I say should be taken. I think you should, formulate your own opinion based on where you're seeing other things. But her premise, and it's this little tiny chart, and I know we all have those little job aids or whatever that we use. I know if you're in the project management, program management world, we have the risk matrix, where you're like, you go high, medium, low on these different aspects of a project, and you mark those three, and then those three combine into a score that tells you what the level of risk is for an investment or a particular situation. So this is not necessarily an unknown strategy, and in her case, it's like, okay, do your research, and so I guess from a standpoint here, you say it's an art and involves discernment, the ability to recognize or confront an issue, and when to step back, right? And we've kind of been talking about this the whole time here. It's not about dodging the conflicts, but about allocating your energy, time, and resources to address those matters, those matters that genuinely matter. In other words, those that support the mission. There could be a whole swirl of activity going on, and there is this idea of delegation and sending people out to kind of handle some of the and I don't ever want to say lower or lesser issues. It's really those mission impacting issues that are not mission impacting, right? Because I can tell you, if you have unhappy customers or people that feel like they weren't heard of during requirements gathering, those are legitimate concerns and they shouldn't be minimized or you shouldn't be ignored. So you could send a business analyst out to talk to them. Okay, first is that they get the opportunity to give you the feedback. The feedback's brought back to leadership, but that's not necessarily the primary mission of what you're trying to get done. So there's this idea that we're always in this prioritization mode every day. I think I deal with 100 different priorities and I restack them and re-rack them 3 or 4 times a day sometimes, and sometimes I hand them off to my middle managers or even the frontline managers and say, okay, here's what's going on. Tell me what you think you can do on this. And, and if you need my help, because that's the other side of that. If you hand these off, that doesn't mean that you are somehow absolving yourself of responsibility. There is a mentality with some leadership folks where they're just like, oh, this isn't me. And over the fence it goes. And then they're like, not my problem anymore. No, it's always your problem if you're a leader. And you need to make sure that. And you also need to make sure that if you're handing it off to somebody, that they're adequately skilled and trained in the art of conversation and they're mission focused. In other words, you need to make sure your team represents your goals and ambitions and your integrity, right, to the customer. Because at some point, if the customer thinks you dumped them onto some underling and that underling told them, sorry, tough, go pack sand, well, that's going to reflect back upon you as a leader, and it will impact your project and potentially your mission. So you really can't sit there, but there is a perspective of, okay, I focus on what's most important to move the entire effort forward. You use your rest of your team to take care of the minor issues that still impact the project, but may not necessarily be. And if you've ever done the whole PMP, project management, and engineering world, the critical path, right? Think about that. If you look at the chart and you say, okay, this is the critical path that we must traverse, and every single one of these things must get done for this outcome to happen. You focus on the critical path, but there's a ton of things that can go sideways in that project that still need to be addressed and still should be given a fair amount of attention, but stay focused on the critical path. So, but her premise here is you do your research, and if you feel like you're in the right, stand your ground. And if you don't feel, and here's the thing, you may be in the right, but the other decision you need to make is, what is going to be the outcome if I push back on this particular issue, right? You ask yourself, okay, what's going to happen? And if you can't sit there and say to yourself, well, if it doesn't happen, the project stops. And if it does happen, the project moves ahead, well, then it's a battle to fight. But if you say, well, if I push back, I can prove myself right, but is it going to change the outcome of the project? Probably not. So at what point does being right trump being solving the problem or moving the mission forward? And I feel like that level of introspection, that's a very hard one to come by, because I can tell you I have fought many battles. And at some point I went, yes, I was right. And there was disappointment completely around the entire room. And I was like, hey, I was right. And it was like, and everybody's like, yeah, so, it didn't matter. It really didn't matter. And it happened to me very early in my federal career, trying to get things done against the bureaucrats. I came in from the outside. I'm like, I'm here to make sure stuff happens. I was rather direct and rude to a lot of people in support of the mission. So ironically, I was mission focused, but I did it in such a way that after the mission was accomplished and I had to work with all these people, they wouldn't give me the time of day. And it took me about 3 or 4 years to build the trust back up with them, to have them actually support me and work with me. And that's a real interesting career lesson, is that you don't want to alienate the people that you depend on to get things done. and the idea that you'll never depend on somebody else is always, you need to make sure that you never assume that you'll never need somebody, because the worst situation is to have a blowout with somebody. And then the next day you're like, oh, crap, I have to go ask this person for a favor. Well, in the professional context, you should never let it get to that. And I think that's the takeaway here, is that do not allow these personal situations to devolve to a point where it impacts your ability to be effective, either as to get business done or to be a leader. Because at the end of the day, mission first, right? And if you stay focused on the mission, it's very hard for people to push back on you, because, oh, you don't want to take care of customers? Okay, thank you. I appreciate your feedback on that, but I'm saying I'm trying to take care of customers and you're saying no. So, I mean, at that point, sometimes people, and I don't present it that way. Well, sometimes I do, but in a very short, small, one-on-one situation. But more importantly, the idea is that when you present it in such a way that they can't push back, and it doesn't mean that they have to roll over and do what you ask them to do, but at least they maybe stop being an obstacle to your accomplishments. So, all
right, here we go. We got another poll question. So how often do you find yourself engaging in conflicts or discussions that in hindsight weren't worth your energy? Frequently, sometimes, rarely, almost never. So once again, how often do you find yourself engaging in conflicts or discussions that in hindsight weren't worth your energy? Don, while people are answering this poll question, I saw a good question coming to our Q&A. Just real quick, what are some good resources for improving persuasion and negotiation skills? Do you have any suggestions there?
Well, I would definitely look towards, I know we use a platform which used to be Skillsoft, now called Percipio. I feel like there's a lot of courses that are in there that might protect. I don't actually, shame on me for not having some more ready list of those courses available. There's lots of books out there too on the art of persuasion, and depending on how you consume it, there's audiobooks, there's regular books you can read. And I would also say there are some really good podcasts out there. Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, Hidden Brain. There's some really interesting podcasts. And the thing I like about them most is they present a perspective, right? And sometimes we can align with perspective, and sometimes we're like, no, I don't align with that at all. But it forces you to say, oh, I have to think about this. And I think all of those contribute to your ability to be persuasive or to negotiate or whatever. I think ultimately, even if you're not good at persuasion or negotiation, presented with deadlines, presented with, the idea of, hey, I only have so much money to spend on this project and it needs to get done and I need help to get it done, and the mission. I think there are plenty of opportunities that you can use to kind of present your argument in a way that is hard for others to refuse, except when you get to the point where there's competing priorities. And shame on leadership, but it happens to us all, that all of a sudden you have 3 number 1 projects, even though there's not the resources to actually make all 3 of them the number 1. So,
got it. No, thank you for that. Here is the results of the poll. So almost 51% say sometimes they're engaging in conflicts that in hindsight weren't their energy, but 35% say rarely. I think that's a pretty good mix. I'm impressed by that.
It is. I am too. I'm like, great. You guys are on, you're better off than I was. I was probably in the 60 to 80% range in my first few years of my career.
Yeah.
And then after I left government and came back, I'm in the almost never category. And it's funny too, because I left and went back to the same agency as a contractor, and my former boss goes, wow, he goes, you brief so much differently now. I kind of was saying, in some words or not, I kind of grew up a little bit, and you can grow up as a leader, you can mature. And a lot of my former colleagues will tell me my edges have been softened over the years, because I'm very passionate. I care about what I do. I'm very intense. I don't mistreat people, but I don't compromise either. So it's a real interesting balancing act for me. And sometimes I have to let people know this is how I am. So don't be offended if I'm, because some people are like, oh my God, he's turning red. I know that happens to me normally, but I'm like, oh no, I'm not mad. I'm not mad at you. This is my thing. So, I care about this and I want to make sure it happens. So, all right. So let's move on.
let's see our next poll question. What do you believe is the most effective strategy? Oops, let's go back to that for a second. Push that one out. What do you think is the What do you think is the most effective strategy for determining which workplace battles to engage in? A, evaluate the long-term consequences of not addressing the issue. Consult with trusted colleagues before making a decision. Assess the alignment with organizational values and objectives. So once again, what do you believe is the most effective strategy for determining which workplace battles to engage in? Evaluate the long-term consequences of not addressing. Consult with trusted colleagues before making a decision. Assess the alignment with organizational values and objectives. We'll give you a few moments to look at that. Don, I'm looking in the chat. There's a lot of support for mission first mantra. And I feel like it's something we should be putting on a sticky if you're a hybrid and putting it on your monitor. So, and you're in those discussions and calls, you do it, but it really does frame, you know, what you're trying to accomplish. I just think it's a great thing to remember. It seems simple, but it's complex. But if you can kind of frame it that way, you're in good shape.
Yeah, it's if as soon as you depersonalize it, it's really hard for anybody to have any argument against it, right? And I think that's the actual aspect of it. The mission, it's not a person, it's what we're here, it's what we do, you know. And so I totally agree. And I have to apologize. This question, this is probably a trick question. There probably should be an answer E, all of the above, because I feel like every single one of these answers actually matters. So don't stress out if you're like trying to pick the best one. There's no answer key on this one. It was more like getting all these in front of you, because every single one of these at some point in time will matter from a decision-making standpoint, you know, as far as workplace battles. So, well,
this will be interesting. Let's see how people prioritize the responses. Let's take a quick look at it. What's our leader here?
Alignment with values and objectives. Yeah, that's good. And followed by very closely with evaluate long-term consequences of not addressing the issue.
Yep.
That's 75%. So, and honestly, I can tell you, the consulting and trusted colleague, there is, you know, I think the other another, I guess, quality or attribute from a leadership standpoint is you don't have to be the smartest person in the room.
Right.
You know, I think ultimately there's always this, there's this idea that, you know, the decision-making part of leadership, right? No decision is bad. Not making a decision. Making a wrong decision, I can tell you, and in my career, there have been probably 6 or 8 times, one when I was running my own software company, there have been 6 or 8 times where I've made a bad decision. But I can tell you, nobody ever came back and said, man, you effed up. You made a bad decision, because you made a decision. The fact that you wait for somebody to make a decision because they're worried about the optics or what's going to happen. I mean, obviously, everybody has their own tolerance for risk. But again, if you focus on the mission and what's important, and I can tell you, you use a set of information to make a decision, and then new information comes in after the fact and points out that you made a bad decision. Most people look at it and go, at that point in time, that was the right decision, you know? But the other thing is how you handle that wrong decision. Well, you fix it. You recover and you move on. You move in a different direction. I mean, there's nothing wrong with you know, but from making a decision standpoint, I think. But I will tell you, more times than not, if I'm presented with a situation and I'm not fully informed, I will go ask a bunch of people. I will find my closest ally who's an expert in the area of expertise, ask them. I will talk to people that may not have any expertise in this, because they have a perspective as well. There's no shame in actually, you know, kind of socializing your concerns with leadership, your own, if you have a great relationship with your boss, with your subordinates. I have a great management team. There are many occasions where I'm like, guys, I'm on the fence here. What do you think? And I will literally go around the room and take everybody's input, and then I'll make a decision, and I'll own the decision. I won't go, well, I went with John's decision, so it's John's fault if it goes south. No, I make the decision based on the information that I had, and then I go on. And I feel like that's another strategy from an effective leadership and management from team perspective is, you know, I had a culture that was I had a culture that needed to be improved when I took over my job 7 years ago. And the first thing I said was, if you disagree with me, let me know. And it's not, again, if we're on the mission, it isn't personal. It's like, look, if you have a piece of information that's going to impact my decision, I want to hear it, even if it goes contrary to my prevailing thought. There's nothing wrong with it. It took almost 2 years of constantly telling people this before I started having people, no, Don, this is wrong. I don't agree. Why don't you agree? Oh, that's a very good point. Thank you for that. And then sometimes I'll be like, I appreciate your input, but I'm still going to decide the other way because there are other political implications. And that's where the leadership part comes in. When you are across the whole organization or across your domain, you may make a decision knowing full well that it's not the perfect one, but to keep the peace, to keep the project moving, to support the mission, you may make a decision that's not popular, which is fine as long as you own it and carry it. So,
absolutely. I appreciate.
And then we're at our key takeaways here.
Yeah, let's do some key takeaways, and then we'll jump into Q&A.
Sure. All right. Focus on knowing when to engage and when not to. Wise discretion. Okay. Don't let every small distraction or criticism derail you from the larger mission. I think that's pretty straightforward. Prioritize controlling your reaction rather than trying to control every obstacle. And I will share, I'm always on camera. That's one of my rules. When I'm in a meeting, I'm on, always. I don't do this whole hide behind an avatar or whatever. And there are occasions where my face gives away my thoughts and I didn't say a word and they will stop the meeting and go, do you have something to add to this particular conversation? Sometimes it's unintentional. Sometimes I do it on purpose to offer some other feedback to the entire situation. But ironically, because I've developed trust and credibility in the organization, people actually do listen to what I have to say. And I'm not making myself out to be some Superman. I'm just saying that in the areas where I'm included, my opinion matters, and I do have an opportunity to say things. And I say it in a way that, again, that is supportive of the end goals, and it's not about me. It's not about, doing things, but and of course, if we're all in some public sector, there are occasions when bureaucracy creeps into a decision-making process and you're like, oh, stop. No, let's just make a decision and move on, as opposed to, well, I think we should evaluate this for another 6 months and do a study and maybe, collect. No, let's make a decision and move on. Let's do a pilot. Let's do a pilot with a small group and see how that reacts versus the delaying making the decision. Focus on understanding the real significance of a challenge before reacting or escalating, okay? And I think ultimately that's back to a couple of things we talked about earlier, just making sure that you hear everybody out. So you ensure that you know what's going on. The other side of it is, if you feel like something's going sideways, then that's where you go out and seek feedback from your domain, right? Within your domain, it could be. And I can tell you, sometimes you get the best feedback from the lowest person in the organization. The guy who's down there on the desk hitting the keys, you ask him what he thinks. Oh, it sucks. They don't think about us when they do these systems. Make me do 100 extra things just so management can track a report. Well, that's feedback that you really should listen to. And sometimes we don't even give them space to talk. And then choosing your reaction thoughtfully defines the outcome more than the initial disruption. So the idea is somebody says something, in my case, I might turn red. My face might make a funny shape. I don't say anything. And then I compose myself and say, okay, what do we need to do in order to move this forward? Especially if the outcome, again, is more important than the actual disruption, because these disruptions are always going to happen. So, all right, I'll shut up and we'll open up for questions.
All right, let's do it. So we have a few kind of like case study scenarios to talk about, and I think the folks would love your perspective. So here's the first one. There are two supervisors in my office. One supervisor will say no because this is policy. The other supervisor allows their staff to do what the other supervisors say no to. This makes it seem as if one or the other is not credible. This also decreases morale for the individuals who are not provided the same opportunities as others. How can staff best respond to these discrepancies?
Oh, man. That is a tough one. And I can tell you, I know of existing scenarios right now within the federal government where this is actually a thing because of telework. There are some organizations that are very, very flexible with telework, and others that would say, hey, the leadership says 3 days a week, you must come in 3 days a week, even though they may sit there and stare at the walls. I don't know that I have a pat answer for something like that. I could tell you if it was me. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. The case is presented as subordinates are saying, I have two supervisors. I think the two supervisors need to talk. And I feel like it means that their leader needs to pull them both together and say, look, we need consistency in our organization here. So it's one or the other, and I think the ultimate situation here is making sure that those, if it is policy, where the flexibilities lie, because we do have rogue managers out there that will do whatever the heck they want. And their people are kind of like, hey, the boss said it's okay, so he's going to get in trouble if we get called on this, and you have to really kind of read the leaves as like, okay, is this a situation that's ultimately going to result in punishment at some point if people discover, or is this the flexibility because one manager's afraid of allowing flexibility due to the optics of it making that person look bad or nothing? So, I mean, that's ultimately something. And if you have a feedback mechanism to leadership, like an open door policy, the anonymous feedback, the comment box, which I offer all of those, or a town hall concept with Slido. I always use anonymous means for feedback when I have town halls with my teams. I have about 350 people on my team because I want them to feel like they can ask a question and not be potentially chastised for asking it because we don't know who they are. So I know that wasn't like probably the answer you're looking for, but that would be a strategy by which to get it addressed.
No, I think that's solid advice. Here's just more of a general question. What's one thing folks do wrong when they're in a work conflict?
Let emotion take over their judgment.
Okay.
I think at some point, and it's funny, I actually was going to make a note about this. I've had occasions where I've been in meetings and I walk away furious. I'm like, good. And I will go back to my desk and I will open up my email. And the first thing you do is you put yourself on the to line, not the person you're mad at. And then you just sit there and you pound it out in your email. You no good for nothing. How dare you, blah, 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 blah. And you get that all, you just get it out. You literally, if that person was in front of you, you give them the what's for and the who's whatever, and you do all that. That's pretty cathartic, and it will actually let you take a breath. And then you let it sit. And then you come back to it the next day, and you read that email. And you're like, ooh, I shouldn't have, And then if you still feel the need to communicate with that person, now you're in a different frame of mind, and now you can clean up that email to a point where it actually speaks to the problem and not your emotional reaction to the person, and then maybe go back to them and go, look, after thinking about this overnight, here's where I feel like we're not aligning. Here's my suggestions or thoughts on how we should proceed on this issue. Or here's how I think we should manage addressing this deficiency in the project or how we should handle it. That's a very effective tool because I have sent that email. I had a particular case, if we got time. Yeah, we do. So I had this guy, I was hiring the Super 15 at DHS headquarters. And he came in and this guy worked at the White House and he wrote a bunch of software for the White House. And I'm like, he worked for Secret Service. Like, dude, they're not going to let you go. He goes, I can't get promoted. This is my only way to get a promotion. I'm like, all right. So I walk him around the office, introduce me to everybody. And he's like, yes, I'm coming. I'm leaving. We had a start date all set. I walk away. So the start date was like 3 weeks. The Friday before he was due to report, he calls me and leaves me a voicemail. He doesn't even talk to me in person. I've decided I'm going to stay where I'm at. My agency made me an offer I can't refuse. I'm going to stay. I was like, really? And I was like, oh, how dare you? That sounds like, I wrote a very, and I was in the right. I CC'd my boss. So it wasn't like I was being flamed or whatever. But the tone of my email was probably not as professional as I would hope it to be. And I sent it to him, he sent it to his boss, who sent it to his boss, who sent it to his boss, who sent it to the director of Secret Service, who sent it to the other secretary manager at DHS, who sent it back to DHS headquarters. And I had a magical meeting show up on my calendar to meet with the executive, Chico, the following Monday. And I kind of got my butt handed to me because, I upset a bunch of people. And everybody in the room agreed with me that everything I said was valid and true. But he said, you made one mistake. You put it in writing. And he said, it's going to live on the internet forever. So, hopefully it's not out there anymore, but that was 15 years ago. But that was a case where I let my emotion, I was so mad because the job had closed. I had a candidate and I deferred to a different candidate because the rest of the panel said this candidate, and I could have hired this other person who'd already been started. All of those things happened. And I let it get the best of me, and I sent it. And so now when I get mad like that, if I have that situation, I do the email and I let it sit overnight. And I have not sent any since. So
hey, that is the right way to go. So hey, Don, I appreciate it. This was a great session today. Thank you very much for enlightening us on this. Really, it's a complex topic, and it touches so many parts of our jobs and our careers. So really do appreciate your insights there. As a reminder, folks, the slide deck and all this archive will be available to you. You'll be emailed tomorrow with all this information. So I also
my email address is actually on the last slide. There's a thank you slide. It has my email address. If anybody needs somebody to talk to, feel free to reach out. I try and be very responsive. I do know sometimes this is really hard. So, but best of luck.
Thank you. That's great. Let's thank our partners here, our alliance partners. Thank you for their support of NextGen. This is what allows us to provide free training to all you awesome folks here. And I want to thank all of you for attending today. It's such an honor to get together, 2,000 plus government employees for some professional development training. You all work so hard. We appreciate everything you do in your service, and we're hoping this is helping you stay in government longer and continue to do great things. I'm required to talk about what's next. So what is next? We have learn more, stay in the environment. Lots of resources available to you. We have our afternoon keynotes coming up in a little bit. Visit the exhibit hall. By visiting the exhibit hall and other places, you can move up the leaderboard, receive some awesome prizes, talk with one another, go to the networking lounge. There's a lot of good conversation going there, a lot of like-minded folks. And if you have any questions, once again, it's nextgen@govloop.com. Once again, thank you. I hope this was a useful day for you. More to come. Join the afternoon keynotes. Feedback, always welcome. Once again, on behalf of GovLoop and NextGen and Don, thanks for joining us today, and we will see you around the environment. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.